My name is Lorraine Jenkins, and for the longest time, my world was a small two-bedroom house in Detroit, a place I had scrubbed and polished into a shrine of quiet dignity. The floors shone with a luster born from 40 years of diligent hands, and in the summer, my backyard garden exploded with the defiant colors of zinnias and marigolds, a riot of life I coaxed from the tired city soil. For most of my 73 years, I believed that this was the purpose of my life: to tend to things, to nurture, to provide a clean, safe, and loving space for the one person who mattered more to me than my own breath, my daughter Camille. I saw my reflection not in the mirror, where age had etched its relentless map upon my face, but in her successes, in her happiness. My life, I thought, was the foundation upon which she would build her own magnificent castle. I was the soil, she was the bloom, and I never once begrudged the arrangement. It was only later, when the foundation was ripped out from under me, that I realized I had been tending to a garden that was never meant to sustain me. My story, like so many others, began with a man who promised the moon and delivered only shadows. Terence was his name, and when I was young, his laughter felt like sunshine. But the warmth of that sun faded quickly, revealing a man allergic to responsibility, a man who saw my capacity for hard work not as a partnership, but as an opportunity. He drifted through jobs like a leaf in the wind, always with a grand excuse for why this one, too, had failed him. It was the boss, the economy, the wrong phase of the moon. While he dreamt of get-rich-quick schemes, I was the one getting up before dawn to catch the bus to my cashier job, then coming home to start my second shift cleaning office buildings downtown. My hands were perpetually chapped from bleach and dish soap. My back ached with a permanent, low-grade fire, but I did it without complaint. I did it for us, for the family I was so desperate to hold together. Terence, meanwhile, found comfort in the arms of other women. Women who didn't smell of pine cleaner and exhaustion. The divorce, when it finally came, was less a heartbreak and more a quiet, weary amputation. The sickness was gone, but I was left to heal alone, with a 6-year-old girl who had his charming smile and my determined eyes. From that day forward, my life was a singular, focused mission: Camille. She would want for nothing. My 2 jobs became a permanent fixture, my existence a carefully balanced equation of income versus her needs and wants. When she needed braces, a shimmering metallic cage for her teeth that cost more than my car was worth, I sold the car and took the bus everywhere for 2 years, my feet aching in the winter slush. I told her the engine had given out. When she dreamt of going to the state university, a dream that felt as distant as Mars, I took on extra weekend shifts, cleaning up after raucous office parties, my knees screaming in protest as I wiped spilled drinks from sticky floors. I ate tuna and crackers for dinner for a year to afford her textbooks. Each sacrifice was a brick I laid in the foundation of her future, and I considered it a sacred duty. I never saw it as a burden. I saw it as love made manifest. She was my masterpiece, the living testament to my endurance. As she grew into a woman, she was everything I had hoped for. She was beautiful, intelligent, and carried herself with a confidence I had never possessed. She met Darius in her final year of college, and he was as polished and ambitious as she was. He had a firm handshake, a smile that gleamed with expensive dentistry, and a way of looking at me that felt like he was appraising antique furniture, valuable in its own way perhaps, but ultimately old and out of place in his modern world. They were a perfect couple, 2 shiny new coins, and I was the worn, faded dollar bill that had paid for their minting. When they would visit my little house, they filled it with the scent of expensive cologne and the vibrant energy of their grand plans. They spoke of travel, of a condo downtown, of a future that glittered with promise. I would sit on my worn floral sofa, pouring them tea, my heart swelling with a pride so vast it felt like it might crack my ribs. I was a part of this, I told myself. I had made this possible. They would call me Mommy, a term of endearment that Camille had clung to long into adulthood. It was a sweet, childish word that had the power to make me forget my aching joints and my dwindling savings account. "Oh, Mommy, you have to see the ring," she'd say, and the word would be the sugar that helped the bitter pill of my own lonely life go down. The wedding became the singular focus of their world, and by extension mine. It was to be the grand coronation of their perfect life together. They spoke of venues with soaring ceilings, of caterers who could sculpt ice into swans, of a dress that would be simply legendary, and I, foolish and blind with love, was their eager patron. For 40 years I had maintained a separate savings account. It began as my escape fund from Terence, then morphed into my retirement fund. But as Camille grew, it was rechristened in my heart as the wedding fund. It was the sum total of my deferred dreams, the physical embodiment of every extra shift, every skipped meal, every turned-down thermostat in the dead of a Michigan winter. It was my life's work, condensed into a series of numbers in a worn blue passbook. The day I gave them the money is seared into my memory. We sat at my small kitchen table, the one I'd refinished myself. I had baked a lemon pound cake, their favorite. The check I had written felt impossibly heavy in my hand, as if it were weighted with the years of labor it represented. When I slid it across the table, Camille's eyes filled with tears. "Oh, Mommy," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You are the most generous person I know. The best mother in the world." Darius put his arm around me, a rare gesture of physical affection that felt both practiced and startlingly effective. He smelled of sandalwood and success. "Lorraine, we could never repay you for this," he said, his voice a low, sincere hum. "This day, our perfect day, will be because of you." They talked excitedly about the dress they would help me pick out, a beautiful mother of the bride gown in a shade of dusty rose that would complement my skin. I went to bed that night feeling a profound sense of completion. My work was done. My daughter was happy. My masterpiece was finished. The silence that followed was subtle at first. The weekly phone calls became less frequent. When I asked about the wedding plans, Camille was vague. "Oh, Darius is handling everything, Mommy. It's all so stressful. I don't want to bore you with the details." I accepted this, believing she was trying to spare me the anxiety. I busied myself tending my garden, imagining the look on her face as she walked down the aisle. I pictured myself in the front pew, dabbing my eyes with a lace handkerchief, my heart a supernova of love and pride. I was so lost in my own sentimental fantasy that I didn't see the truth that was barreling towards me like a freight train. The discovery did not come from a phone call or a gentle conversation. It came from the cold, impersonal glow of a computer screen. My grandniece Sarah was a prolific user of social media, a world I barely understood but sometimes browsed to feel connected. One Tuesday afternoon I was scrolling through her page, looking at pictures of her children, when a new post caught my eye. It was a photograph of a piece of stationery, thick and creamy, with elegant gold script that shimmered even in the digital image. It was an invitation. My breath caught in my throat. It was for the wedding of Camille Jenkins and Darius Vance. It was stunningly beautiful. And as my eyes scanned the elegant text, a cold dread began to seep into my bones, a chilling, numbing poison. The invitation was addressed to Sarah and her husband. It listed the names of the wedding party. It detailed the venue, the date, the time. And it requested the honor of their presence at the celebration of a union blessed by their families. The parents of the groom were listed. The father of the bride, Terence Jenkins, was listed. My name was not there. It was not a mistake. It was an erasure. The phone felt like a block of ice in my hand as it slipped from my grasp and clattered to the floor. The sound was distant, unreal, as if it had happened in another room to another person. The world went utterly silent. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, a sound that had been the steady heartbeat of my home for 30 years, vanished. The chirping of the sparrows outside my window ceased. All I could hear was the frantic, panic drumming of my own blood in my ears. I stared at the screen, at the picture of the invitation, my own name's absence a gaping, screaming void. I was not just uninvited. I was unmentioned. I had been edited out of my own daughter's life, my role as her mother completely and utterly redacted. It was a public declaration that I, the woman who had funded this entire opulent affair, was not a part of the family being celebrated. I was just the help. My fingers, clumsy and trembling, fumbled to pick up the phone. I had to call her. There had to be an explanation, a terrible misunderstanding. My mind raced, trying to construct a scenario that made sense. Maybe there was a separate invitation for me? Maybe this was a special version for extended family? The lies I tried to tell myself were thin and pathetic, but they were all I had. I dialed her number, my thumb shaking so badly it took 3 tries. She answered on the 4th ring, her voice bright and cheerful. "Hi, Mommy. What's up?" The sound of her casual affection was like a physical blow. "Camille," I began, my voice a dry, cracking whisper. "Honey, I saw the invitation. Sarah posted a picture of it online." There was a beat of silence on the other end of the line. A silence so heavy and dense it felt like a physical object. In that small pause I knew it was true. "Oh," she said finally, her voice losing its warmth, becoming brittle. "You saw that? My name? It isn't on there, baby," I said, the words feeling like shards of glass in my mouth. "They must have made a mistake at the printers. And I haven't received my own copy yet." I was begging her, pleading with her to give me an out, a plausible lie I could cling to. She sighed, a sound of pure, unadulterated annoyance. "Mommy, look, it's complicated." Suddenly, another voice was on the line, smooth and placating. It was Darius. "Lorraine, let me handle this," he said, his tone that of a man dealing with a slightly hysterical child. "Camille is just a little overwhelmed. We were going to talk to you about this." "Talk to me about what?" I asked, the confusion giving way to a sickening wave of dread. "Look," he said, his voice dropping into a confidential, reasonable tone that was more insulting than any shout would have been. "We just want the day to be perfect, you know? No drama. And well, with Terrence being there, we thought it would be best to avoid any awkwardness. The word hung in the air between us, a missile that had found its target with devastating precision. Awkwardness. My presence, the presence of the woman who had sacrificed everything for her child, was being defined as an inconvenience, a potential social faux pas. They had invited Terrence, the man who had abandoned his child, who hadn't paid a dime of child support, who had reappeared in Camille's life only when she was a successful adult with a wealthy fiancé. They had chosen the deadbeat father who contributed nothing over the mother, who had contributed everything. The cruelty of that choice was breathtaking. It wasn't just an oversight. It was a deliberate, calculated decision. I was the awkward secret. I was the embarrassing working-class mother who didn't fit into their shiny new life. The check I wrote was welcome. I was not. "So I'm not invited to my own daughter's wedding?" I asked the question flat and dead. There was no more hope in my voice, only a vast, empty cavern where my heart used to be. "It's not like that, Lorraine," Darius said quickly, the false sincerity dripping from his words. "Of course we love you. We'll have a small, private dinner with you after the honeymoon. Just for you. It will be special, a consolation prize. A quiet little dinner in the shadows, after the main event, after I had been publicly disowned." I don't remember saying goodbye. I think I just let the phone fall from my ear, listening to the hollow buzz of the disconnected line. I sank into my armchair, the one Terrence had left behind all those years ago, a lumpy, faded relic of a life I thought I had escaped. The house was silent again, but this time it was a crushing, suffocating silence. The walls seemed to be closing in, the air thick and unbreathable. I looked around at the small, tidy rooms, at the photographs on the mantelpiece. Camille as a baby, Camille on her first day of school, Camille graduating from college, her arm linked through mine. Each image was a lie, a frame from a movie that had a different ending than the one I had written in my head. The pain was a physical thing, a great jagged stone in my chest, making it impossible to breathe. I had built my entire world on the foundation of a love that, I now realized, had been a one-way street all along. I had given and given until there was nothing left of me, and they had taken it all without a backward glance. I was not a mother. I was a bank. And now that the account was empty, the bank was closed. For 3 days I did not leave that chair. The sun rose and set outside my window, casting long, mournful shadows across the living room carpet, but I didn't notice. The phone rang, but I didn't answer. I knew it was them calling to manage the fallout, to smooth over the awkwardness with more placating lies. I didn't eat. I didn't sleep. I just sat suspended in a state of profound shock, the echo of Darius's voice replaying in my mind like a broken record. Awkwardness. 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 The grief was a thick, heavy fog, blurring the edges of the world. It was a sorrow so deep it felt bottomless. I had lost my daughter, but the truth was I had lost her long ago. I just hadn't been willing to see it. I had lost myself even earlier. On the fourth day, something shifted. The fog began to thin, not because the sun came out, but because a cold wind of anger began to blow through it. It started as a small shivering tremor deep inside me. I looked down at my hands resting limp in my lap. They were not the hands of a delicate woman. The knuckles were swollen with arthritis, the skin dry and crisscrossed with 1,000 fine lines, the nails short and practical. These were the hands that had scrubbed floors, packed lunches, counted out pennies, and signed a check that had paid for my own erasure. These hands had built a life for someone who considered me an embarrassment. The tremor of anger grew into a low, simmering heat. The tears that had been perpetually welling in my eyes dried up, leaving behind a salty, gritty residue. The sadness wasn't gone, but it began to change its shape, to harden, to crystallize into something else. It was becoming fuel. I stood up from the armchair, my joints groaning in protest. I walked not to the kitchen to make tea, but to the small desk in the corner of the room where I kept my important papers. I pulled out my bank statements. I stared at the most recent one, at the single massive withdrawal that had gutted my life savings. Below it, the remaining balance was pitifully small. Then I went to the hall closet, a place filled with the accumulated detritus of a lifetime. I pulled down a dusty cardboard box labeled Lorraine's Things. I hadn't opened it in 30 years. Inside, beneath old photo albums and my high school diploma, were my sketchbooks. I had forgotten I even had them. As a young woman, before Terrence, before Camille, I had wanted to be a baker. Not just a home baker, but the owner of a small cafe. I had filled these books with sketches of storefronts, with detailed layouts of kitchens, with page after page of recipes inherited from my mother and grandmother, written in their elegant, looping cursive. I had dreamed of a place with a little bell that jingled over the door, the air thick with the smell of cinnamon and fresh coffee, a place where people could come to feel warm and welcome. I had given that dream up without a second thought, another quiet sacrifice on the altar of motherhood. I traced the faded pencil drawings with my finger, the image of a small, cozy cafe with a sign that read Lorraine's Place, coming into sharp focus. The anger that had been simmering within me now had a direction. It was no longer a destructive fire threatening to consume me. It was a forge. And in that forge, a new resolve was being hammered into shape. I began to calculate the cost of my devotion, and for the first time it wasn't in dollars and cents. The cost was this box. The cost was the woman who had filled these pages with dreams, a woman I had buried alive decades ago. They hadn't just taken my money, they had taken my life, my future, my past. And while I could never get the years back, I realized with a sudden shocking clarity that I could still claim what was left of my future. The plan that began to form in my mind was not one of revenge. I had no interest in ruining their wedding or exposing their cruelty. That would still be making my life about them. This plan was something far more radical. It was about me. The first person I told was Martha, my next-door neighbor. She was a widow, a no-nonsense woman with a wicked sense of humor and eyes that missed nothing. She had watched me for years, had seen the way I lit up when Camille's car pulled into the driveway, and the way I seemed to shrink when it pulled away. I invited her over for coffee, my hand still shaking slightly as I poured. Then the whole sordid story came tumbling out of me, every last humiliating detail. When I finished, my voice hoarse, I expected pity, or perhaps awkward condolences. Martha gave me neither. She set her coffee cup down with a firm click, her eyes blazing with a righteous fury that warmed me to my soul. "That ungrateful little heifer," she said, her voice a low growl. "And that smarmy snake she's marrying. Lorraine, I've been waiting for you to wake up for 20 years. She didn't coddle me. She validated me." "So," she said, leaning forward, her expression fierce, "what are you going to do about it?" I took a deep breath and told her my idea, the one that had been born from the dusty pages of my old sketchbook. I told her about the cafe. I expected her to tell me I was crazy, that it was too late, that I was too old. Instead, a slow, wide grin spread across her face. "It's about damn time," she said, slapping her hand on the table. "It's about damn time you baked one of those sweet potato pies for someone who actually deserves it." And I expect the first slice to be on the house. In that moment, Martha became more than a neighbor. She became my co-conspirator, my cheerleader, my first customer. She was the ally I didn't know I desperately needed, the sisterhood I had been denied by my own blood. My secret plan became my entire world. The grief was still there, a dull ache in the background, but now it was overshadowed by purpose. My hidden advantage, I realized, was the very thing I had always given away so freely, my skill. For decades, my baking had been an offering of love. My lemon pound cakes were legendary at church bake sales, my pecan rolls the highlight of every neighborhood potluck. I had fueled Camille's study sessions with chocolate chip cookies, and soothed her childhood heartbreaks with warm apple crumble. It was a talent I had never valued in myself, a part of my domestic duty. Now I saw it for what it was. A marketable skill, a form of artistry, and the key to my own salvation. The money they had taken was gone, but the knowledge in my hands and the recipes in my mother's handwriting were still mine. I took the small amount of money I had left, the emergency fund I had kept hidden even from myself, and saw it not as the dregs of my old life but as the seed money for my new one. Together, Martha and I became detectives. We scoured listings for commercial properties. We found a small, sad-looking storefront on a street that was just beginning to show signs of revitalization. The windows were grimy, the paint was peeling, and it had the lingering smell of dust and forgotten things, but it had good bones. The rent was, by some small miracle, affordable. The day I signed the lease, my hand trembled, but not with fear. It was with exhilaration. This was the first thing I had ever done that was purely and entirely for myself. It was a terrifying, magnificent act of rebellion. I spent the next few weeks turning that neglected space into my own. I scrubbed the floors on my hands and knees, but this time the ache in my back felt different. It felt earned. It felt productive. I painted the walls a warm, buttery yellow, a color that felt like sunshine and hope. Martha and I haunted thrift stores and garage sales, finding mismatched tables and chairs that we sanded and repainted, each one a small victory. I bought used kitchen equipment, a sturdy commercial mixer that hummed with power, ovens that could hold a dozen pies at once. I was physically building my new life, and with every nail I hammered and every coat of paint I applied, I felt a piece of the old broken Lorraine falling away. The day of the wedding came and went. I knew the date. It was marked on my calendar from a time when I thought I would be there. I did not cry. I did not allow myself to imagine the scene, the flowers, the music, my daughter in her legendary dress. Instead, I spent the entire day in my new empty cafe, a roller in my hand, applying the final coat of yellow paint to the last wall. The smell of the paint was clean and sharp, the smell of a new beginning. As I worked, I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. They were celebrating their future, a future built on my past. But I was here in the present building a future that was all my own. They had not erased me. They had liberated me. About a month later, the phone rang. The caller ID showed Camille's name, and my stomach did a little flip. I let it ring 4 times before I answered, my voice calm and even. "Hello, Camille." Her voice was syrupy sweet, oozing the practiced affection I now recognized as a prelude to a request. "Mommy." "Hi. We're back. Bali was just divine. You would have loved it." I said nothing, just a non-committal She chattered on about the honeymoon, the white sand beaches, the luxurious hotel, all things my money had paid for. Then she got to the point. "So listen, Mommy, we're in a bit of a bind. We kind of overdid it on the wedding, and the deposit on our new condo is due, and we're just a little short. I was wondering if you could just float us a little loan just to tide us over." There it was, the reason for the call. I closed my eyes, took a deep, steadying breath, and unlocked the cage where my new self resided. "No, Camille," I said. The word was quiet, but it was as solid and unmovable as granite. There was a stunned silence on the other end. What did you say? She stammered, the sweetness curdling into disbelief. I said no. I repeated a little louder this time, feeling a surge of power. There is no more money. The bank of Mommy is officially and permanently closed. Her shock quickly morphed into indignation. But you can't. After everything we've been through. We're your family. Before I could respond, Darius was on the phone, his voice a low, threatening purr. Lorraine, what is this about? Camille is upset. After all you've done, you can't just cut her off. She's your daughter. The hypocrisy was so astounding it was almost funny. Darius, I said, and my voice was as cold and sharp as a shard of ice. You wanted to avoid awkwardness at the wedding. Well, this is me avoiding any future awkwardness. We have nothing further to discuss. And then I did something the old Lorraine would never have dreamed of doing. I hung up the phone. I pressed the red button and cut the connection. The silence that filled my small house was not the empty, crushing silence of grief. It was the clean, expansive, and beautiful silence of freedom. The last chain had been broken. The grand opening of Lorraine's place was a modest affair. There were no ribbons to be cut or local dignitaries to be seen. There was just me, Martha, and a handful of new friends from the neighborhood I'd made during the renovation. The bell I'd installed over the door, a small brass bell I'd found at a flea market, jingled for the first time as Martha walked in carrying a potted orchid. To new beginnings, she said, her eyes shining. The air inside smelled of fresh coffee, melting butter, and cinnamon, a perfume of pure comfort. I stood behind my counter wearing a clean white apron and felt a sense of rightness, of belonging, that I hadn't felt in my entire life. This place, these smells, this feeling, this was home. The cafe became my life, but in a way my old life never was. It didn't consume me, it fulfilled me. I woke up before dawn not with a sense of weary duty, but with a quiet hum of anticipation. I loved the meditative process of kneading dough, the alchemy of turning simple flour and sugar into something that brought people joy. My customers became my community. They were teachers, artists, retirees, young mothers. They came for the coffee and the sweet potato pie, but they stayed for the conversation and the warmth. My little cafe became an anchor in the neighborhood, a place of connection. I was no longer just Camille's mother. I was Lorraine, the woman who made the best pound cake in Detroit. I had an identity that was wholly my own. Several months passed. My life settled into a happy, predictable rhythm. Then one afternoon, the bell over the door jingled, and my heart stopped for a beat. It was them. Camille and Darius stood in the doorway, blinking in the warm yellow light. They looked out of place, their expensive clothes and tense expressions a stark contrast to the relaxed, comfortable atmosphere of my cafe. The polished shine I remembered was gone, replaced by a frayed, weary look. Reality, it seemed, had been a harsh master. They walked to the counter, and the handful of customers in the cafe fell silent, sensing the sudden shift in temperature. Camille looked around at the bustling little space, at the happy faces of my customers, at me, standing tall and confident in my apron. Her face was a mixture of disbelief and resentment. "Mommy," she began, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear, pitching it for maximum drama. How could you do all this? Build this whole new life, and just cut us out completely?" She was trying to paint me as the villain, the cruel, abandoning mother. But the narrative no longer worked. I was not the woman she remembered. I wiped my hands on my apron and looked at her, my daughter who was now a stranger. I felt a pang of something, not love, but a distant, sorrowful echo of it. But it was overpowered by the calm, solid strength I now possessed. I did not raise my voice. I did not engage in her drama. I simply spoke the truth. "I didn't build this to cut you out, Camille," I said, my voice clear and steady, carrying through the quiet room. "I built it because you had already cut me out. You made your choice. You just wanted the building, not the architect. Now you've seen it." "I'm very busy," Darius stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. "You have no right," he started, but I held up a hand, a simple gesture that silenced him instantly. "This is my place of business," I said, my gaze firm and unwavering. "And in my place of business we are polite. If you are not here to buy a piece of pie or a cup of coffee, then you need to leave. The finality in my tone was absolute. They stood there for a long moment, utterly defeated. Their power over me, the power of guilt and obligation, had vanished. I had no currency here. In my world, you had to pay for your cake. Humiliated and speechless, they turned and walked out the door. The little brass bell gave a final cheerful jingle, a sound like mocking laughter, as it closed behind them. After they left, a profound quiet settled over me. It was not the hollow quiet of loneliness, but the deep, resonant peace of a battle finally won. My customers slowly resumed their conversations, but a few of them caught my eye and gave me small, supportive smiles. Martha came up to the counter and squeezed my hand. "Well," she said, "I guess they don't like sweet potato pie." I laughed, a real genuine laugh that came from deep in my belly. The last thread had been cut. I was completely, unequivocally free. My new life is a simple tapestry, but its threads are strong and its colors are my own. I wake with the sun, I bake with joy, and I fill my days with the warmth of my small community. The cafe thrives not because it makes me rich, but because it makes me whole. It is a testament to the fact that it is never too late to reclaim your own story, to be the architect of your own joy. I found a strength I never knew I possessed, a resilience forged in the fires of the deepest betrayal imaginable. And what of forgiveness? I have forgiven Camille. I did it quietly on my own, one evening while closing up the cafe. I forgive her not for her sake, but for mine. Holding on to that anger was like carrying a sack of hot coals, burning only my own hands. Forgiving her was putting the sack down. It does not mean I will ever let her back into my life. Some doors once closed must remain locked for the health of the soul. But it means she no longer has any power over my heart. The pain is no longer a gaping wound, but a faint silvery scar. A reminder not of what I lost, but of what I survived and what I became. My name is Lorraine Jenkins, and I am finally wonderfully the main character in my own life. What would you have done in my place? Could you find it in your heart to forgive such a deep betrayal, even just for your own peace of mind? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and your stories give me strength. Please write me and tell me where you heard this story today. It warms my heart to know how far these words can travel. If you enjoyed my story and would like to support the channel, please consider liking this video and subscribing. There are so many other stories waiting for you. For those who are able, using the Super Thanks feature helps me continue to bring these narratives to life. With heartfelt greetings. Until next time.